How y'all are? It's Moon Griffon, the Moon Griffon Podcast. Great to have you back with us as we rock and roll and continue to grow the program. Today, I got one of my favorite guests of all time. I call him Stephen Parr, the climate czar. He is my climate czar. He is a meteorologist, and all this crazy green stuff that y'all been hearing me talk about, Stephen has been a big part of it because he's kind of the guy that can fill me in. Stephen, how you doing, buddy?
I am doing great, Moon. Thanks for having me on.
Well, I appreciate it. I mean, we're trying to save the planet from the nuts on the planet. So if you understand what I mean.
I do. Yeah.
Anyway, it was funny. I was reading an article today. It was a big article in the Epic Times and talking about how these renewable energies, this is not going to work. It's not going to work when it comes to windmills. It's not going to work when it comes to solar panels. It's not going to work with the electrical stuff, the electric grid. And it was amazing. They were getting this from someone who's been around watching this for a long time. Yet we're being milked here in the United States of America and told this is the way we got to go to save the world. I just thought I'd get your thoughts on that at first.
Yeah, the math just doesn't work on it. We can't create enough energy from just wind and solar alone. We don't have the raw materials necessary to do it. We don't have the raw materials to create the battery backup systems when those things fail, because you can't. Yeah, this is one of the things folks on the left don't seem to fully understand. You can't actually control the weather. You can't make the wind blow. You can't make the sun shine. And as much as they like to think, we actually can't control the whole global temperature like it's a thermostat. We don't have that kind of power. I'm
going to stop you a second. Can I ask you a quick question? See if you can answer.
Yeah.
What's harder, for us to control the weather or for man to have a baby? I'm just kind of curious because that's kind of what we're fighting right now. If you can answer that question, you don't need to be on this program.
Okay, actually, I can kind of answer that question because there are things that people can do to affect weather in the short term. So you can do things like cloud seeding, and that does create a little bit of rain in a small location, but it might actually take away rain from another location. So you can actually do some things. And our cities actually do create what's called an urban heat island, where you got all that glass and the metal and the concrete, and that just warms up faster than grass and trees do. And so it just creates this pocket of heat. And that can create what's called a rain shadow downwind of the city, where you get rising air, and that actually creates some rain there. Men can't have babies. So
yeah, but the thing about it is, what you talked about, fossil fuels have nothing to do with what you just talked about, by the way.
No. And the other part of it is that it messes up our global temperature records, because most of the land-based thermostats are located at airports. Well, airports are located in cities. Now, we used to build these airports on the outskirts of the cities, but our cities, as we've had the growth of cities, they now envelop the airports, right? And so your airport temperature station is surrounded by more concrete, more glass, more metal than it used to be 50 and 100 years ago. And that is going to drive the temperature up. It makes it look like the whole planet's warming up. It's not. It's just Atlanta's warming up. New Orleans is warming up just in the city itself. And one of the ways you can really see that is the overnight temperature doesn't get as cold as it used to in the city, simply because the city traps that heat.
And a lot of concrete. Stephen Parr, my climate czar, meteorologist. Stephen, so recently we had tornadoes come through the South, especially down here in the South where we live. Mississippi was hurt. Unfortunately, some people died. But, I've been watching this trend for a long time. In the spring, sometime in the fall, especially in the spring, where we're going to get some tornadoes. We're going to get some bad weather. We're going to get some rough weather. I don't see anything different from now than it was when I was a baby, when I was a kid, when I was a teenager, when I was in college. There is no difference, but yet they're trying to take this and say, you see the weather changes? Well, the fact of the matter is that's been going on since before I was born, before you were born. But they making it sound like now we're going to be able to stop this. I don't know about you, and you're a meteorologist. I don't think we'll ever stop a tornado or hurricane coming whenever it wants to come. I don't think we can affect it. But I just thought you mentioned something about that.
No, yeah, we really can't control. We can't. Not only can we not predict exactly where a tornado is going to hit and when it's going to hit. Like, hey, a tornado is going to hit your house at 5:27 and 30 seconds. We can't do that. We don't have that ability. And if you can't predict where it's going to happen, how do you think you're going to stop it from happening in the first place? That's crazy. When you look at the actual data on tornadoes, there has been no increase in significant tornadoes. So that's the EF 2, 3, 4, 5, right? There have been no significant increase in significant tornadoes in the last 150 years. Now, we have seen an increase in the reporting of EF zeros and EF ones, the smaller tornadoes, but that's because we got Doppler radar, and Doppler radar was able to see these tornadoes, and we were able to go out the next day and say, oh, yep, sure enough, there's a little bit of damage right here from this path. Well, 50 years ago, we didn't have that technology. We didn't see those tornadoes, so they didn't get marked down because we didn't know to go look for a tornado that came through that took the top off of 3 trees. We wouldn't have gone and looked for it. It wouldn't have ended up in the data. So you can cheat and you can lie with the data and make it seem like, oh, look, we've got more tornadoes. No, we don't. We have the same number of tornadoes that we used to have. It's just that Doppler radar allows us to see them better.
Yeah, I was going to get to the technology point. You brought it up. The technology is so much different, and I'm going to say it's better. You're a meteorologist. I think you would agree with that. So you're going to pick up more stuff than you used to pick up 50 and 100 years ago. So you can make anything look like you want to, once again, with statistics and new ways of doing things. But my problem is for them to tell us that we got to save the planet and we can stop tornadoes and hurricanes and thunderstorms and floods and droughts and all that stuff. We can't start them, so we can't stop them. We can't start any of them, so we can't stop them. We can start a forest fire, and I'm going to get to that in a minute. Just your thoughts on that, because the technology you just stated really is the big difference in this.
That's absolutely the big difference. And the other part is we talk about global temperatures. And one of the ways we measure global temperatures is from satellites now. We got 2 different data sets that measure global temperatures from space. Well, that data set only goes back to 1979. Why? Because we didn't have satellites up there before 1979. So you can look, now it's 1979, if you look at the surface record, that actually corresponds to a time when we had been dealing with global cooling coming out of the 1950s down into the 1970s. So 1978, 1979, actually about one of the coolest years over the last 100 years. And so when people will put a graph out and show, look how much we warmed up from 1979 till now. Well, yeah, 1979 was a cold year. That just happened to be the year we put satellites up in space. So
once again, nobody's talking about that nationally. I mean, you just said something that I didn't know, and I'm glad I know now because I'm going to use it when I talk about it. When the satellites went up, that changed everything. Yeah. That changed everything.
Right. Well, it changes our view of the Earth. But unfortunately, we start thinking in such short time scales. We think in our lifetime that 10 years is a long time. But when you're talking about science, when you're talking about the Earth, 10 years, nothing. It's the blink of an eye. And so to say, oh, look what's happened over the last 10 years, and here's the other mistake we make. We say we draw straight lines off of data. So we say, look, it's gone up for the last 10 years. Oh, it's going to keep going up for infinity at that same rate. Nature is not linear. Nothing in nature moves in a straight line. It all changes, it all curves, it all bends over time.
Would you tell me that when you look at, as a meteorologist, when you look at just general weather, and you've been around for a while, you can probably pinpoint when it's up, down, good, bad, hot, cold, or, we had 50s hurricanes were just horrendous. And we built everything we built everything on the coast. So you could probably go by it if you stretch this thing out for hundreds of years, and I know that's kind of hard to do, you're going to have a different run in every 5 to 10 year period.
You absolutely do. And it's because you have changes in how the heat is stored in the oceans. So we talked before about El Nino and La Nina. El Nino is when you have a warm weather pattern in the Pacific Ocean around the equator. It's warmer than normal in the Pacific Ocean around the equator. That's called an El Nino. When it's colder than normal there, that's called a La Nina. Well, look, most of the planet is made up of water, and the Pacific Ocean is the largest ocean we have. So when you have changes in temperature in the ocean, it changes the flow of weather around the entire planet. And so when you have years where you have big El Ninos, you don't have hurricanes. You just don't have a lot of hurricanes in the Atlantic basin. It just changes the overall global weather pattern. And so that's one of the things that, kind of happens, and we go, oh, look, global warming. No, it's not global warming. It's changes in the distribution of the heat in the ocean. That's what we've got to figure out why. We don't fully understand what causes climate to change on Earth right now. But if you really look at the data, it is linked to the El Nino La Nina cycle. And as soon as we can figure out what causes El Ninos and La Ninas and be able to start predicting those, we're going to know a lot more about climate science. We've actually been spending so much time focused on carbon dioxide that we're running behind the knowledge that we should have had we been focusing on the actual cause of climate change.
Yeah, Stephen Parr, my climate czar, meteorologist, and we're talking about this whole, I call it communism of climate change, like we're going to do something. We can't stop it because we can't start it. Listen, before I ask you, I want to get into something else more specific, but I wanted to do this. You've been a meteorologist for how long?
About 20 years.
Okay.
Yeah.
If you go back 20 years, I don't think anybody ever mentioned, I might be wrong and you're going to correct me. I don't remember ever watching the news or weather and anybody talking about wildfires as part of climate change. Wildfires as part of global warming. Although I got to tell you, fires can get pretty hot. So, but in a natural standpoint of weather and climate and all that, 20 years ago, nobody talked about that. Now, they had a study out the other day that said it was 2 areas in California and 3 in Louisiana that made up for the most dangerous places the last 5 years when it came to the climate. But the reason they counted California more than anything was they had 20 or 30 wildfires in the last 5 years. It was a big number. And of course, they got a lot of woods and it burns up a lot of acreage. When you've been a meteorologist, did you ever remember in your early days of anybody saying, look at these wildfires, you see what happens if we don't do something about the climate?
I'll move the time frame back a little bit. 25 years ago, absolutely. You're absolutely right. Nobody was connecting wildfires and climate change. But part of that was because the big media hadn't, 25 years ago, big media hadn't quite yet bought into the lie of man-made climate change. That happened about 2003.
Okay.
I remember watching ABC News with Diane Sawyer, and she did a report on climate change, and she reported on it as if it was fact. I remember the day, and I went, oh, they've bought into it. They're no longer being objective journalists. They've now bought into this thing, and now we're in trouble. So since that moment, yes, now you're starting to get more people linking everything to climate change. And part of that also becomes with how climate science is funded. We have spent billions of dollars on funding for climate science research, but that comes from the government. So if you want that government money, you've got to link whatever it is you're wanting to study to climate change. As long as you link it to climate change, you're much more likely to get the government grant to do the study you want to do.
Now listen,
and so that
I like, as you know, I used to hunt, but I really like to fish.
Yeah.
For years, you'd go fishing and you'd be up a creek or whatever, and you'd see a tree that looked like it was burned. It looked like it was black. It was maybe burned down. And I understand that lightning has probably hit that. Nobody set a match out there. It was probably lightning. That's weather that's coming through. I get that. Okay. And I'm not saying some forest fires hadn't started from that. But part of that is they don't clear cut because they're trying to save the mosquito worm or the monkey grasshopper or something that they made up to say we got to save it, so they won't let them clear cut. And that's made a difference in a lot of these fires. But I understand that every now and then Mother Nature may strike with electrical and it starts a fire. But that don't necessarily mean anything to do with what we're talking about now. That just happens. I mean, we're in South Louisiana, and I can go back. I fish in the basin and things like that. And then you go back in these little areas, and you will see occasional tree here, there, 2 trees that are black, and you can tell they've been burned. Well, they've been burned because electricity probably hit.
Moon, I learned a big lesson. I went up to Mount Rushmore several years ago, and they have a photo in the museum there of part of the Oregon Trail, because part of the Oregon Trail kind of went through that area. And so they have this photo from the 1800s of this wagon train going through a forested area. And then they have a photo from the 2000s from the exact same vantage point. And what's interesting is there are so many more trees in the modern day photo than there were in the photo in the 1800s.
Wow.
Okay, so the forest is thicker there today than it was 150 years ago. And you start going, well, why is that? Why would that be the case? Well, it's because we let small fires burn back then. In the 1800s, we didn't have, the Forest Service stopping every single minor little fire before it could grow. And so what the fires did was they thinned out the forest so that the individual trees that were there were healthier, so that when a big fire came, those trees were better able to fight off the big fire. And we didn't have as much undergrowth and all this other stuff. Well, the modern forestry management philosophy is you have to stop every fire in its tracks. And as a result, what we've done is we've built up decades of dead brush at the bottom of the forest so that when you get a big fire coming through, you're not going to be able to stop it because it becomes this inferno. Thomas Jefferson said a little revolution every now and then is a good thing. A little fire every now and then is a good thing because it prevents the big fires from breaking out. Wow. But we have suppressed the little fires, and so now they blame it on global warming. It's not global warming; it's man's management of the forest.
Yeah. One of the other things I want to talk about, something else you mentioned in a few minutes we have left, the scientists. And I want you to explain to people how these scientists are really bought off. And what I mean by it, and you mentioned a little bit earlier, there's billions and billions of dollars of money out there, and you get the money if whatever you're going to prove comes back to be man-made global warming, man's going to change the planet. So talk a little bit about the science, because they will throw that, 97% of the scientists, or whatever number they use.
Right.
All agree on this. I mean, Obama was great at saying, well, I'm going with the scientists say. Well, they didn't go with the science when it comes to a man and a woman. They don't go to science when it comes to when a baby starts. They don't go to scientists about wearing masks. I mean, I can go on and on with the science they don't use, but boy, they love throwing the science at us with this, and I don't see the science in it at all. Explain it out when they say scientists say.
Well, part of you're getting to the right part is they actually aren't following the science when it comes to climate change, because in science, when the data proves your theory is wrong, you have to change your theory. In climate change, when the data came back, the global temperatures came back and proved that the theory was wrong, they changed the data. So we're not following the science when it comes to climate change in the first place. But part of the reason we're not is because the government grants. It's so much of science in this country is done today based off of government grants to universities. It's not based off of like it used to be with inventors trying to learn something or private think tanks. That's how science used to be done. But after the success of the Manhattan Project and we realized, government gets involved, look how much we can do. Well, now the government money's just flowing. And if you want your grant money, you've got to try and prove something the government wants proved. Yeah. So if you were to come out and say, I've got this theory that this whole global man-made warming thing is bogus, and I'd like $100,000 to try and prove that, well, you ain't get that $100,000. They don't want you to try and disprove man-made global warming. But if you could say the blind salamanders in the caves near Austin are being affected by global warming. Okay, great. Here, have some money. Yeah, it's corrupt, but that's how it's working.
Well, we can take in our state or any other state. I'm seeing things happen because the federal government, when they passed their last stimulus, I really think 90% of that was to get this movement going. So they're dropping money in people's pockets left and right. And I saw this carbon capture. I got to tell you, Steve, Stephen, I don't see where carbon capture and putting it in the ground and putting it in a tank or putting it in the ground. Who comes up with stuff like this? What the heck does that mean? What is it? I know this. With people saying they're going to do it, we're going to get a lot more federal money. And you got more people looking at windmills and solar farms only because of the amount of money coming. And if you didn't have that federal money jacking up everything that we got in inflation, you wouldn't even worry about stuff like this. But the money's coming and people look at it as, hey, my ship's come in.
That's right. And one of the things that, I'm a free market kind of guy. One of the reasons why I believe in the free market is that the market itself tells you things. One of the things the market will tell you is what people think is important. And you know that people think it's important because they're willing to spend their money on it, right? Mm-hmm. So if people are willing to spend their time and their energy and their money on something, you know that that's important. But the government comes in and starts spending money on things. And what happens is ultimately the government lies to the market. And the government says, this is something that's important, and we know it's important because we're throwing a whole bunch of cash at it.
Mm-hmm.
But the market doesn't think it's important. And so it becomes inefficient, and it becomes a waste of money, and it becomes a waste of resources simply because the government is lying to the market with trillions and trillions of dollars. And that's what this whole, this Inflation Reduction Act, which what an awful name for a bill, has nothing to do with reducing inflation. Yeah. It really was the shoehorning the Climate Plan Act. That's really what it was.
Well, last thing, I'll let you go. When I look at all this, I kind of cringe because people are taking the money, and I got a former buddy of mine, and I can tell you more details I won't. And I asked him, he's a big farmer. They lease land to people to farm. And I said, man, you haven't jumped on the solar panel farms yet? He said, no. But he said, I got to tell you, we probably will. I said, why? And he said, the money they're going to give us for doing this. He said, it's going to beat anything that we can get from the farmers. And he said, how can you turn it down? I get it. I understand that part. But man, one day this is going to bite us in the rear end, and it's not going to be pretty. Stephen Parr, go ahead. I'm going to let you close up, and I'm going to let you go.
I was going to say, but that does two things that's wrong. One, by the government throwing money at farmers to build a solar farm, they're going to drive up people's energy costs.
Absolutely.
But at the same time, they're going to drive up people's foods costs because we're not going to be making as much food.
No doubt
it's a double whammy.
Stephen Parr, the Climate Czar, the Moon Griffon Show, and I want to thank Stephen. God bless. Thank you so much. We're going to do it again soon. I wish people would listen to this segment, and you can. Make sure people listen to the Moon Griffon podcast. Make sure you subscribe. Please subscribe wherever you get your podcast, Rumble, YouTube, wherever. We'd love for you to be a part of it. But this right here, you got more information in this 20 minutes, folks, to learn about this climate change thing that you're going to get in the real world for hours and hours of study. Moon Griffon podcast. Thank you very much.